It's 5:15. I'll go ahead and call this board meeting to order. I did want to make you all aware right away here at the beginning that we have a couple of public communications. For those that are going to be, that have submitted the form for the public communication, when it is your time to speak, I will make you a panelist in the meeting to allow you your 5 minutes to address the board. And so I will do that with Dr. Post Vanderberg first, and then followed up by Mrs. Daniel Giesler. So if you want to, and I see that you have used your full names in the attendee box, so I will be able to identify you easily. So thank you so much for that. With that, if you are able, if you could please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. Uh-oh. Sorry, my flag went away. There it is. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Diane, would you please read the school board norms, please?
Yes, the board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with a united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you. And moving on in our agenda, we'll go into the public communication. As I previously mentioned, I will be giving Dr. Post Vanderberg the panelist. And just as a reminder, you are given 5 minutes to address the board. The board may ask you questions for clarification, but that is the limit as to what happens during the public communication portion, and also that the board may choose to, if you ask any questions of the board, they may choose not to address those questions at that time, as that is not the function of the board during these public communications. So with that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you,
okay.
Dr. Vanderberg.
Excellent. So I have a prepared statement, if that's okay, if I just read that, and then I guess if folks want to ask questions afterward, is that okay?
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, thank you for allowing me the time to address you on the matter of the hiring decision for the principal at Washington Elementary School. I'm representing the parent subcommittee of the Washington Elementary PTO. So I guess I just wanted to start out by saying that we were a little surprised to learn about this proposal. No one from the school board or the superintendent's office notified us of this significant decision. And as far as we know, no other parents were notified either that this was under consideration. So we took it upon ourselves to reach out to the parents at Washington to poll them regarding their feelings about this proposal. And I've provided the results to you via email, so you can peruse those at your leisure. I would say that the vast majority of those that we heard from favor hiring a new principal. And I would point out that most of those parents are concerned with spreading a principal's duties too thinly because it might negatively impact their child's educational experience. Most of the parents also expressed some concerns about children being left unattended in their classrooms while a teacher fills in for the principal. This issue of children being left unattended is actually not very far-fetched. Many of the parents at Washington have already had some experience, either directly or indirectly, with having teachers having to leave their classrooms unattended for periods of time to deal with serious behavioral issues. And that was when we had a principal who was full-time and was actually leading the response to those behavioral issues. So this situation, though, I'd like to just point out, I don't think is caused by staff incompetence or a lack of efficiency. I think it's either caused by understaffing or caused by a lack of resources, for example, resource officers and things like that. And it's our view that situations like this would become, would be just simply exacerbated by having a half-time principal. We'd also like to point out that our current principal has effectively worked more than a full-time job at Washington, and that she worked hard to cement strong relationships with Washington families. She spent a lot of time helping families and students navigate difficult situations, and our point is that having a full-time leader in our school is required if we're going to meet educational goals, because a person in that position helps to provide emotional and educational stability for the staff and students. Developing the level of trust and rapport with the staff, students, and parents takes far more than 20 hours a week, and I would even argue takes more than 40 hours a week to develop. Moving to a half-time principal sends the message that our schools are overstaffed and that our children's needs are of an administrative nature, which I don't necessarily think is true. We'd also like to address the comments made by the board in the previous meeting about this issue. First, it's our position that a trial run of a half-time principal is misguided. We've tried this before, and the parents were largely unhappy with these results. It also sends the message that the school district is not ready to commit to dispelling inequalities among our elementary schools. Second, we feel that conflating the need to make this decision with failure to pass the last referendum is a little puzzling. Our guess is that the school board may not know the full reason for why the referendum wasn't passed, because to our knowledge, no information has ever been collected from parents about why they voted against it. Short of having this information, we think that these two issues should actually be kept separate. In the end, our position is that both Washington and Louis L'Amour Elementary deserve to be staffed with full-time principals. We'd also like to ask that prior to any other significant decisions like this one, that the district administrators or the school board members please reach out to their constituents to inform them of their intentions. And that's all I have. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Thank you. And thank you for doing so succinctly. That was very nice. Are there any clarifying questions that the board would like to ask Dr. Post-Vanderburg? Jason?
I was just going to ask what kind of response rate, unless I missed it, your parent survey had, or just to clarify that.
Yes, so we have roughly somewhere between 80 to 85 families at Washington, and so our Washington response rate was a little under 50%, which if you compare that to social science, what social scientists expect back from polls is about 10%. So we feel like we've surveyed close to about half the families.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions for what was stated by Dr. Post-Vanderburg? Okay, thank you so much.
Oh wait, I think somebody was raising their hand.
Oh, Diane.
I had a question about, I did not catch the association you made to the referendum. Can you repeat that for me, please?
Yes, so, well, I can paraphrase it. Basically, what we're saying is that we are not sure, so there was a statement made that seemed to kind of, the last board meeting, that seemed to kind of conflate this decision with a failure to pass the referendum, and that the voters had essentially sent a message. And we would like to argue that actually we don't really know why the referendum failed, because I don't know that any information's ever been systematically collected to analyze why it actually failed, and that we feel like if we don't have this information to be able to say that there was a clear message there, that in fact we should keep the referendum failing and the hiring of the principal as two separate issues rather than related issues.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, and now we will call upon Mrs. Danielle Giesler. All right.
Am
Mrs.
I mute?
No, you're not.
Sorry.
Oh.
Thought I.
That's okay. Do I
One
need to
moment,
mute?
Mrs. Giesler, if you could just.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I just need to do one more click here. I think I've done what I needed here. There we go. Yes, Mrs. Giesler, if you would, you can, go ahead and begin addressing the board.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm here to read a statement, and I'm representing Jamestown Education Association. And this is in a follow-up in regards to the letter that was written and sent to all of you as board members. So I hope that you all were able to receive that and read it. Just wanted to follow up with a few comments. JEA has very strong reservations about the sharing of a principal position between Washington and Louis-L'Amour elementary schools. This concept is something that was tried in the past and was determined to not be in the best interest of students or staff in these schools. When it is mentioned that people don't readily opt for change, they also do not readily opt for a return to something that is known that didn't work. Even with an administrative intern, it is not possible for a teacher to do two things at once. You cannot teach and do administrative duties at the same time. Challenging situations do not call on convenience in order to plan themselves around a teaching schedule or a shared administrator's availability. This means that in some circumstances, our students in at least two classrooms would not be able to be placed first. JEA would also like to point out that in other districts, when administrative interns are used in single section schools, they are employed full-time as administrative interns. They are not asked to teach as they are training to be administrators. Regarding a schedule to mirroring that of a shared school counselor places this school counselor in an inappropriate and unethical situation. School counselors should not fill roles other than that of a school counselor. It conflicts with counseling relationships that are built on time and trust with students and parents alike. Additionally, time is a commodity, and we already have a shortage of that with our counselors. Recently, we also no longer have regular access to our school resource officer in our schools. A shared administrator would remove another layer of safety in our schools. We asked the district to explore and address JEA and staff about liability. The district cannot ask teachers to be liable for what happens if classrooms are left unattended. This likely will happen if a teacher must step out to provide administrative duties. This leaves teachers and the district liable for anything that happens. Staff and parents at both schools have indicated they are reluctant and anxious to return to former circumstances of shared administration and what unknowns could come with being the sharing of a principal position between two buildings. JEA seeks to open this dialogue up to families and staff to ensure that their views and perspectives are not being overlooked. People are the thread of everything we do and care about at JPS. While this is a decision you, as a board, did not want to have to make, we recognize that students and families drive such a choice and hope that they ultimately do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Giesler. Do any board members have clarifying questions? Okay, thank you. Sorry, just have to do a couple things here and then we'll move on. Sorry. I think I got it then. Okay, here we are. Thank you all. Moving on in our agenda, are there any conflicts of interest to declare? With none, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I would so move.
Motion by Greg, second by Bob. Any discussion? All those in favor, please unmute your mics. Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on into our regular meeting, we have nothing under recognition or correspondence, so we'll move into reports. Dr. Leck, the superintendent report.
Thank you. You do have my written report here. There are some items I will, because they're agenda items, and we do have an item that has received some interest, and we have people logging in to see. I'll try to be as succinct as possible here. In terms of new teacher hires, as has been our practice, I'm sharing 2 prospective candidates that will be acted upon later in the agenda. Sarah Robinson comes to us from the West Fargo School District, is being recommended as a special education teacher. And Brittany Chandler is actually a native Jamestown High grad, received an undergraduate degree in elementary education from the University of Jamestown, and she's actually been working within the district as a resident teacher and working on that graduate degree as a special education strategist at UND. And I will note, as is typically the practice with candidates like Mrs. Chandler, she is getting in the process of having her graduate degree conferred. So she's just graduating. So the salary amount that you see for her, like any teacher that changes lanes, will be increased. But you're looking at that snapshot in time for where Ms. Chandler is right now. But just note that that is a graduate degree that is coming here in the next week or so. You will be asked to act on a position for the food service director. I think we feel very fortunate to find a qualified candidate like Mr. Oster. The difference, or the one particular caveat that I want to make, is that we have an opportunity here. Mrs. Mack has been our food service director for a number of years. We feel like she has a great deal to offer a new food service director. And so the secondary contract that we are bringing forward and recommending is to allow for Mr. Oster to work 12 additional days. Those would be prorated. So he can have a chance to work in terms of the year-end prep and also get a little bit of insight and training from Mrs. Mack. We feel like she's a resource that we need to leverage. And so those are the 2 contracts for food service. And with food service, I think I want to take some time just to clarify a little bit. There's been some questions that I've had related to food service in the pandemic. And we've talked a lot about food service and our ability to, with the slackening of regulations for food service, that we've been able to provide meals for all students and really all children, anybody from 18 and younger, a free meal. And we've also talked about the need to use some of those CARES dollars to bring our food service account back to where it has been. And I want to clarify that those are 2 different things. So in terms of the meals that were provided to children during the pandemic, so we have to follow all general child nutrition guidelines, but we need to understand that those meals are completely reimbursable through federal programming. So the option to extend that through June 30th, that's something that's coming up in later on in the board. That whole process has been providing revenue for food service. Of course, we have costs associated with those, but if we extend, if the board votes to extend that service through June 30th, we'll create a budget that matches that reimbursement. So that's a zero sum. There's no negative impact to the budget. What has had an impact to the budget, though, is, and this is what we've suggested to use CARES for, and that is because during the pandemic, we've had a budget shortfall, but that's related to a loss of revenue based on the decline of our paid meals, our a la carte our snacks. Those are all revenue generators for a food service. So every month, while we are receiving some reimbursement from the meals that we're providing, it's not covering those costs. As you're all aware, the governor has said, and even the CARES Act requires, that all of those positions are paid through the end of the school year. So in actuality, without our serving of meals to students 18 and younger, or all children 18 and younger, we'd actually see a bigger cost, a bigger negative balance to the food service. So it's actually been a benefit to us because we still maintain the same personnel costs. So it's actually a benefit. And this whole, how we are suggesting to use the CARES is going to be fully articulated to the board when we bring our CARES budget in June or July for your approval. But I just want to make the separation between, because we're paying these meals out, it's actually a benefit to our food service, and that slow decline has been mitigated. And so it's been providing a great service to our community, but it's also been slowing down the rate of lost revenue as well, or I should say greater expenses. And I'd be happy to answer questions for those when we get to the end of my report as well. So summer school and summer school planning has been an area that we've really struggled to define how we're going to work. That has been, like a lot of things in the pandemic, really ever changing. So the regulations that we get continue to change because the environment changes around us. And I don't mean that to throw darts at the Department of Public Instruction or the governor's office. I think they've done about as well of a job as they can do. They have struggled with all of these changing variables just like we have. And so on May 7th, the guidance we received from the state was that all summer programming had to be virtual. But on Monday, that next Monday, it was changed to now there's the availability with strict regulations and guidelines that we could have those face-to-face. So while we're initially struggling with how to do that at the K-8 level, with the changing regulations and guidance, now we know that we can. We do feel, and I think the board has expressed concern about a lack of summer programming in the past, but now we know that we can provide those. Of course, there's very strict regulations that we're putting in place to ensure that that's a safe environment, but those are our plans. One of the changes at the K-5 level is traditionally we've done that at Gusner Elementary, or excuse me, typically we've done that at Louis L'Amour Elementary, but for this year, we think it's best to do Gusner Elementary. There's a little more space, there's larger classrooms. We can spread out our students a little bit more to help with the congregating. So that's where we will be holding our K-5 summer school. 6 through 8 and extended school year will take place at Jamestown Middle School. Again, the 6 through 8 is a slightly smaller group than we usually see in K-5. Generally, that's around 70 students at K-5. It's only around 15 per class at the middle school level. So it's a little bit of a different program with remediation, but it's still an important program and one that we want to continue. At the 9 through 12 level, that's really very different because all of those programs are credit bearing. So it provides a lot of opportunities as well as the remediation that happens K through 8. So because of that, we have more interesting classes. And so we're looking to do more of a hybrid, kind of a blend of virtual and face-to-face to minimize the number of students in the high school facility at any one time. Even though that's a large facility, not all of the rooms match what we would want to do in terms of social distancing. So we just want to limit that time, the time that students are all congregating and just to be able to best match those guidelines. Again, I mentioned extended school year as a required program for special education students. And I also made a note, although that we are a hub from the Valley City CTE in terms of adult education, we are still going to continue adult education after June 1st. So those classes will resume on June 2nd, and they'll run through the 25th of June. And we're planning for a graduation ceremony on July 14th at 7 o'clock at the JVCTC. Of course, all of these summer programs could change based on what phase we're in and the environment around us in terms of the pandemic, but those are our plans initially. It's important to note also that we've been recently asking for and receiving some guidance for different summer activities and we're happy with those the flexibility that's provided for summer programming from the governor's office. They are, as I mentioned, a really integral part of student development, and we want to make sure that athletic and co-curricular opportunities continue. Just like summer school, though, the rules are going to be different. What existed for those summer programs 2 years ago aren't going to be the same thing that they are now. We just have so many more regulations that we have to follow, but we're going to provide those to the degree that we can, if we can. Again, that could always change, and we've had a lot of questions, understandably, related to prom. And based on our ability to host events on school property, is very limited. There's really no ability for us to utilize school grounds for an activity like prom at this time, but we'll continue to monitor that situation as it comes. The last item that I had in my report was graduation ceremony planning that we'll get to later. But I'm sorry, one last thing. Just wanted to share that as part of the performance assessment from the Department of Public Instruction, they commended our district for compliance with IDEA and for our continued efforts towards improving educational opportunities for students with disabilities. And we just received that. I wanted to pass that along as well. But with that, I would stand for questions.
Great. Great. Thank you for sharing that good information with us. I'll open the floor here to questions or comments for Dr. Leck, but I did want to just express my gratitude for the adjustments that are being made through that 9 through 12 programming for the summer. As this pandemic evolves, it's quite possible that we're going to be in this flux of classroom and online environment and kind of having to meld those things. And so I appreciate the work that will hopefully be able to happen with the classroom and then join with the virtual now with a smaller set of children and students. So maybe some of those things can get worked out prior to the whole implementation in the fall. Of course, we all hope that we can come back into our classrooms, do what we love to do and love to see, but that more than likely isn't going to happen. We will have a new normal, and this will hopefully help guide some of those decisions and guidances that we'll have to implement for public health standards. So we shall see, and I look forward to hearing more about that, the lessons learned. Board, do you have questions for Dr. Leck? Jason?
Yeah, have there been any concerns expressed by parents or staff about summer school maybe delaying it? Are we fully staffed for summer school?
I think anytime, Mr. Rohr, when you have this kind of pandemic, there's always going to be questions and concerns about the process. You know, probably the important thing to remember is these are not required activities, they're optional activities. If what's been set forth is, you know, deemed by a family to not work for them, they do have that opportunity to not. In terms of delay, I really don't know how different some of these regulations would look in July versus June. I think the optimum time to do that probably is right now. I was really struggling, to be honest, with the virtual side of K through 8. I just didn't feel like that was going to be a great option. And so to have the ability to provide that option to families, I think is really important. In terms of staffing, we'll provide out the names that we have thus far, but just like every year, sometimes those change as things come up and people say, well, I was going to do it, now I'm not going to. But our teachers are no different than our families. They're trying to decide if this is, you know, right for them. I would hope that as people see the guidelines that each of the buildings are putting out for the activities, they can feel a level of comfort, or at least make that decision and say, you know what, this isn't for me, and that's okay. If something isn't, you know, if they feel like that is not the opportunity they want to pursue, you know, then we start asking again and look to see if there's somebody else that wants to. Hopefully that answered your question.
Any other questions for Dr. Leck for his report? Oh, okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and move forward. And I do need to pause one moment. I do apologize. I meant to bring this up at the beginning of the meeting. For those that are attending the meeting, when you sign on, if you could please use your full name. If you were to attend a school board meeting in person, we have a sign-in sheet, and that is used for public record. And since we are needing to do these virtually, the attendee name is the only way that we know how to keep the name for the public record. If you're unable to change your name, because sometimes I know Zoom makes it difficult for you to change your name to be able to identify, if you could please email myself or Dr. Leck what your username was that you chose to use, and what your name is. So again, and that is for public record, as that is normal procedure during a board meeting. I apologize for that interruption. Moving on in the agenda, we have nothing under board education, so moving into old business, we have the elementary principal position. Back on the May 4th meeting, we did a table of a motion, and that motion needs to be addressed. So if I could please have a motion to take from the table Mr. Toso's recommendation of the shared position between Lewis L'Amour and Washington Elementary. Motion by Heidi, seconded by Roger. Yep. Any discussion? I'll unmute your mics. All those in favor of taking that off of the table, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. So we have the elementary principal position, the memo in front of us. Dr. Leck, would you like to provide any more commentary?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So I appreciate the public comment that came. I think that's an important perspective for the board to hear as you're making a decision. You have my written recommendations, and I provided some follow-up information in the initial recommendation came in board memo 57. The follow-up information comes in board memo 59. And of course, I'd be happy to answer questions from the board related to that. But I do think it's also important to clarify and share some specifics around that recommendation. So when I first came to Jamestown 7 years ago, to be honest, I was a bit surprised that the district operated 2 single-section buildings with 2 full-time administrators. I did learn that the district operated a shared principal philosophy for a number of years, but as the board is aware, transitioned away from that due to the absorption of CAS staff. This included a full-time administrator position that previously did not exist. So from my perspective, anytime you have attrition, you need to take a strong look at staffing to determine if your staff is what I call right-sized. I strongly considered a recommendation 2 years ago to move to a shared principal position, but ultimately I felt that we did not have the right personnel in place to make that change reasonably, so I shelved it. So I felt, not the right time. But as I looked at this situation and the staff that we have in place now, it felt reasonable to bring that recommendation. And as has been mentioned before, and as was referenced in public comment, changes like what have been recommended are difficult. And they're difficult because they require a change to how we do things, how we've operated. A recommendation to share a principle, while isn't a new idea, is concerning to some because it creates questions and it may require different actions, varied protocols, a change to systems. It's different, it's scary, and it causes a lot of consternation, and I understand that. And I think all of those perspectives have value. Every building format has benefits, and every building format has downsides. The most obvious benefit of operating a single section building is, as you mentioned earlier, or has been mentioned earlier, it creates this wonderful familial atmosphere. All parents, staff, students, they're all very connected because of that small size. As a family, I know who's going to be my child's fourth grade teacher. My student knows who's going to be his classmates or her classmates. And it's very connected and it's very family oriented. It's a great environment. The most significant downside to that, though, is single section buildings are really inefficient. And with inefficiency comes other really less desirable trade-offs. Chief among those is the need to share staff. This is already happening in a number of situations, a number of staff. It happens with counselors, specialists like music and physical education. Sharing staff is never ideal. It is a byproduct of size. There are a number of different strategies, some of which were referenced earlier, that allow for a shared principal position to work. Just like creating a schedule that organizes when the counselor is in each building, that maximizes staff, as was referenced earlier in public comment. From my perspective, assume we have A-B's, for the lack of a better term, say we have A days and B days. In an A day, the principal is at Louis L'Amour, the counselor is at Washington. In B days, that would be the opposite. In this type of schedule, the counselor is able to support the administrative intern, but more importantly, the student. I do think that there is a little bit of a misconception about the plan, though, as was referenced earlier, a counselor in this situation doesn't take on administrative duties. Rather, they're there to support the needs of that intern, whether we call that the intern, the assistant principal, a building facilitator, which is what they were called in the past. Whatever you call them, a counselor isn't there to take on administrative duties. A counselor would be there to support the needs of that intern or assistant principal. Oftentimes that would mean working with the student, as any counselor would do. It's not an administrative role, but a supportive one. Additionally, the administrative intern, assistant principal, building facilitator would not deal with substantial behavioral issues. If significant issues arise, the counselor, the intern, assistant principal would contact Mr. Delzer, in this case, the shared principal, and he would be able to attend to the issue. I think there's also the misconception that the administrative intern would constantly be pulled from a classroom and create an instructional void. I don't see that occurring practically. I understand that there would be issues. Of course there would be. Some of these need to be dealt with immediately. Others could be addressed with a communication to the building principal, Mr. Delzer, and other situations could wait. And this happens all the time, particularly in larger buildings. Administrators have the need to prioritize items and address them as necessary. So I don't think that that's much different than what would happen in a larger building that we have now. From my perspective, these are solutions that make sense. You've heard other perspectives. I know that they make sense in that they're workable because they've been done in our district in the past and they occur in other districts. Superintendent Basler, for example, served as an assistant principal in Bismarck Public Schools. In an assistant principal in Bismarck Public Schools means exactly what we're talking about. That this classroom teacher or specialist that serves this additional capacity to support the needs of the building when the building principal is not in the building. So not a foreign idea. In the past, and I've heard discussions of inequities, and I think that's fair for the board to consider, and any inequities. Some of those have already been brought forward, and I think those are fair. I would add, however, that there are inequities that actually would be addressed by this proposal. When you consider leadership responsibilities, the number of staff required to observe and students to support, there is already a significant disparity between our 3 multi-section principals and our 2 single-section principals. This proposal would get those expectations in line and really create greater equity between the elementary principals in terms of their responsibilities. And I will say, changes like these are never easy. The easiest recommendation I could have made is simply to maintain the status quo. In actuality, it would lessen the burden on administrators and the central office, and we certainly wouldn't turn away the help. The easiest recommendation, though, is not one that I can make. I feel that we're overstaffed with 2 single-section building principals. While this is mostly about creating a workable solution, there is financial components to consider as well. It's a significant annual cost to continuing with the status quo. And my recommendation centers around efficiency and working towards maximizing the outstanding staff that we already have in place. This is a staffing plan, as I said earlier, that works in other districts. It's even worked in our district in the past, and I don't see a viable reason why, if all committed, this couldn't work as well. So the last statement I have is ultimately my role in this process to make a recommendation to you, and that's what I'm doing. That recommendation is based on the analogy I use all the time. It's based on the whole pie. It's not based on a piece of the pie. So if the board chooses that recommendation, I'm going to plan and move forward. If the board chooses a different option, I'll plan and move forward. I respect the difficulty in the board has in making this decision, just as I know that you respect the process that I've gone through in making the recommendation. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Melissa?
First of all, I'd just like to thank all the parents and staff and faculty that reached out to all the board members to voice your opinions on this situation. It was good to have that feedback from the public, and I appreciate that. Secondly, I speak from experience of having a child who was in the school system when there was a principal who was split between the 2 schools. And his teacher happened to be the one who had to step forward out of his classroom when the principal was gone. And that happened on many occasions where he and his class were left in the classroom alone. It was an older grade. So obviously they handle things a little bit differently, but it still took away from class time. I mean, if something's going on in the middle of the math lesson, teachers pulled out in the middle of the math lesson. So to that end, I still strongly am opposed to having one principal in two different buildings. I'm going to throw something out here that may just kind of puts a whole new perspective out there, and it may be met with great disdain. But if we can't have one principal in two different buildings, can we move mobile buildings and have those placed on one school ground so that the principal is there and there's two of each session at the same location? Just a thought.
Melissa, thank you for that. However, we do need to specifically address the topic on the agenda, but thank you for bringing that forward. Any other questions for Dr. Leck? Can I have a motion?
Just a
Dr. Leck?
Just a point of order, you have a motion that you brought back from the table. So you don't need a new motion, you just have to act on that one. And depending on what your decision is, you would, either we're moving on in the agenda or you're going forward. And
Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, I would recommend also that you restate the motion so everybody's aware.
Of course. Jason, did you have a question or comment?
Sure. I guess, and I don't want to belabor a lot of these points, but I guess my overall concern in this discussion is we're using words such as efficiency, right sizing of staff, maximizing staff. And my concern is that we're using the word efficiency in terms of finances only. And we're using, in my opinion, we need to take a step back and we need to separate the financial aspects of this to the human aspects of this. You know, and what our kids and staff need. Now, again, Dr. Leck uses, you know, the right size terminology, maximizing staff. I see this as just spreading our existing staff even thinner. We're already thin on counselors. And I understand the whole concept of they would be there to support, but not necessarily an administrator. But it really concerns me with the amount of needs we're seeing in these schools that we're going to be asking someone like our counselor to maybe even be drawn away from their routine or their duties. And so, you know, to Dr. Leck's memo in that we read, I think we're placing too much emphasis on the historical context in that there's a precedence. We've done it before. It's debatable if it's worked or not in the past. Some of us feel it worked. Some of us feel it didn't. I'm more interested in doing what's right for our kids now and today. And again, I go back to just the amount of needs that we're seeing in all of our buildings. And I just go back to the standpoint too, yes, we can put an X number of dollars that we're saving our district financially, but we can't put a dollar amount on what this is going to cost our kids, I believe, in their education. And I just feel that an effective full-time administrator is needed in each building. And yes, it may not be as efficient as our multi-class schools, but with education as it is today, I just have strong reservations in terms of liability. It may not happen a lot, but it only takes once for it to happen, and then we're all in a lot of trouble. And then another question I have, and this may not be worked out yet, but are these administrative interns, is their contract going to still be 100% teaching, and then they have an additional addendum that is treated like, you know, an extracurricular activity. Because I would have some reservations on, you know, on that kind of thing. And I'm just struggling to you know, use our words of efficient, maximizing our current staff, because I think our staff in a lot of ways is already maximized to extreme measures. And, you know, I understand in theory that it'd be nice to say, yeah, we're going to have A, Bs, we're going to have B days at each building. But in reality, that just doesn't really happen that neat and clean. So and I will say this too, that I also have some concerns, and I understand the board's not there to micromanage. I do also have some concerns, and we don't need to get into details on that now, but I do really have a concern when our stakeholders and those affected personally by some of these large decisions are not approached first. And I totally understand that we need to start somewhere with an idea. And I just want us to keep in mind that maybe that approach is also what's causing some of our issues with trust in the community and potential passing of referendums. I just have some real strong reservations, and I know the money thing, I understand that. I just think that our Washington families and kids and staff deserve a full-time educational leader.
Diane? You're on mute, Diane.
I'm listening carefully, and this is a very tough decision. You know, I was on the board when we absorbed the CAS staff, and I knew at that time that it might come back to haunt us because it's very easy to give and it's very difficult to take. And we are taking something away that was given during the CAS reabsorption of the folks that were going to lose their positions. So I can see both sides of this issue, I think, pretty clearly. And there are some things that are deeply troubling me that have come to the forefront in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Obviously, the people concerned are very concerned, and they're reaching out. Allegedly, we did not reach out to them, and I think Jason has a point. I'm not quite sure how to do that on these big decisions, but it is a problem of trust and mistrust that we're cultivating here. And I also feel like the things that were said tonight are something that I'm thinking about. One thing that was said was Melissa and the public speaker, Dr. Max, I will say, have seen this at the classroom level, and they're saying that it's no good, that it doesn't work. So that historical context doesn't appeal to me as much, that people are saying, well, yes, it did, but they weren't people with boots on the ground that saw it personally. Another thing that bothers me is that our resource officer has been removed. And I agree with our public speaker that that's just one more layer that's been removed from our safety net protecting our students. And it does bother me greatly that that is unlikely to return anytime soon. So a principal on site would be of great value in that respect. I do get the financial component of it. I understand that. But if I, as a board member, am going to put money anywhere, it would be money that is at the level of the student and protecting and nurturing the student. And I know that we don't have a lot of money to spread around, but I feel like we also don't have a lot of staff to spread around. And like I say, it's a difficult decision, and with that, I'll pass.
Thank you. Heidi?
I'd like to thank people that reached out also. It's very clear that Mrs. Clemens is a very beloved principal and did a wonderful job for our district, and we appreciate her service. And I think, you know, has some big shoes to fill in that school, and as well as Principal Delzer. Parents have, really think highly of him and really like them as their principal and think he's doing a phenomenal job, and don't want to lose any additional time with him in the building. So I do see those sides of it. Also, as a board member, there is a financial side too that we have to keep in mind. This unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, but I believe that this isn't going to be the only financial decision that's going to be difficult over the next couple of years as we look to the future here and what we may or may not get for funding. So that is also a consideration. Dr. Leck, you did mention that there was kind of a middle ground where there would be some shared central office duties. Is that still up for consideration, or did I misunderstand that piece of it?
No, thank you for the question and the need for clarification. I think I referenced in Board Memo 59 that the concept would be to restructure the work that's currently in portfolio assignments to other principals. If the board goes the direction of bringing a person on to devote to Washington, that there would be some restructuring of those portfolio assignments of all the principals to our 2 single section buildings to share a little equity. So my long answer to you, or my short version of my long answer, is that yes, we look to restructure some of those responsibilities, and that there could be some central office support if there is a principal hired at Washington. The idea would be that we would try to maximize the amount of time in the building at Washington, if that's the direction, that we wouldn't need to, in the digital age, there's lots of things that we can do virtually, but there would have to be a commitment to some of those responsibilities if we go that route. Does that answer your question?
Heidi?
And I do see, and at no time do I think that the district has, would work out a plan, to make sure that this, for the safety of students, I think that a lot of thought and planning had started this process. So I don't think about that. The one benefit I do see is, I know we do have several individuals that are getting their master's degree, and just being these building facilitators or interns, I think it would give some good opportunities also for some of our teachers that may be interested in administration down the road. And I think that, there are some positives to this. I don't necessarily see it as a negative as a teacher fulfilling some of those roles. And I think we have a lot of qualified teachers, and certainly it would be nothing that it would be something if they'd be interested in it, not that they would be, forced into doing that. So that's my last comment on this. And I appreciate the clarification on the sharing of the roles, because we are with the one principal with around 100 students in each of those sections, it is half or less than half of the student responsibility anyway. And if we could adjust some of those portfolios, that would at least create some equity there for time.
Steve?
I have a couple questions. I think 2 of them are pretty easy. One of them maybe we don't have an answer for tonight. And then just one comment as a Louis parent. I think the thing that's going to be lost if we would go to a shared principal is Mr. Delzer at recess, Mr. Delzer in the lunchroom, Mr. Delzer in the hallways. That's irreplaceable, and that we're going to lose that time. But I don't know what we do about that. My questions are, if we move to administrative interns, is that on a yearly basis, or are they up for renewal every year, or once they're in, or how do if they're not cut out for it, are they still the intern whether we like it or not? I guess not that I would expect that situation, but just clarification on that. And then when we talk about counselors, I'm assuming they would maybe be the one that would be expected to go cover in the classroom, so we don't have empty classrooms. Just a little clarification on that. And then there was mention about, I guess I would have a bit of relief, knowing that we could revisit it in a year if it wasn't working. But what if we go to a shared principal? What determines if it's working or if it's not working? In a year, if it's not a major disaster, which I don't expect it to be, why would we revisit or not revisit that situation in a year?
So I'll try to answer your questions. If I missed something, please let me know. In terms of you'd asked about how that would work if somebody just locked into this position year after year. No, it would be like a co-curricular. It would be a separate contract, and those would not be in place on a continuing contract. That would be something that would have to be determined and evaluated every year. In terms of the counselor covering, how you're explaining it is partly how I see it. If there was a need for that administrative intern to leave the classroom to deal with an issue, so you would have a counselor to then support the needs of the students in that classroom. That might be the situation. It might be a situation in which the counselor is making a phone call to Mr. Delzer and saying, hey, we've got this situation. How do you want to deal with this? So that could be a role that they serve in that capacity as well. Obviously, the focus would be on minimizing, that instructional void. And I think you had one more question. I'm trying to remember what it was. Can you remind me of the last question?
I'll try to remind myself here too. I think it was, yes, how do we determine if this is working or not, or if it would need to be revisited in a year if we went with a shared principal?
Okay, thank you. So my idea would be, Mr. Delzer and I have had a lot of conversations about this issue since we started talking about it, and we worked through how different scenarios might work and how they wouldn't work. And that's how I would assume assessing, that I would continue to assess based on the feedback I'm getting. He's going to hear from parents. He's going to hear from teachers as far as what's working, what isn't working, and we can adjust. This is a recommendation that's being made based on what I see, and again, I do believe that's an equitable system, and it's an overstaffing of administrators. And I get it that some people are going to say, boy, you're wrong. That's not how we see it. And that's okay. I mean, we can have different opinions, and that's why we bring recommendations to the board, because the board then is a separate group of 9 that says, well, this is what we're hearing, and we have to make the best decision for the district. And that's why we do that. But that's how I would foresee the procedure playing out, that I would be in constant contact with Mr. Delzer about what's working, what isn't working. Is he feeling overwhelmed? Are teachers not feeling supported? I'm sure we'd be visiting with the administrative intern and the counselors too on a regular basis to say, how is that going? Is it working? How often are you being pulled from class, and make a decision based on that. But like I said, when we met last week or 2 weeks ago, in terms of impact, input from staff and parents, we know what the perspective is going to be. The perspective is going to be, please don't do that. Very often you don't hear, we want to go from full to half. That's always going to be met with resistance. That's all you're starting from. We don't like that. And like I said, the easiest recommendation I could have made is just to say, yes, let's continue to do that, because that'll cause the fewest waves. But as I said before, in good conscience, I can't do that. I don't feel like that's the right decision. But that's my perspective, and that's how I see it. And there's other perspectives out there, and sometimes I have the sometimes I have the hardest job in the district. I think sometimes you guys have the hardest job in the district, and this time it's you, and you have to decide what's right. I can only make the recommendation that I, in good conscience, think is the right one, and you have to take that recommendation and say, is it right for the district? So I wish I had a recommendation that everybody could rally around, and we just don't have that. I'm making that recommendation because I think it's the right one when you look at the whole piece of the whole pie. And I get it. I get it. It's hard. And no matter what decision you make, uh, just like no matter what recommendation I make, some people are going to say that's right, and some people are going to say that's wrong. And either way you go, it's going to be tough. But either way, we're going to make it work. Like I said in my statement before, if you choose to go with the recommendation, we're going to make that work. If you choose to go with a different recommendation, we're going to make that work too. It's going to be okay. We're going to go along with whatever recommendation you make, and we're going to make it the best one. So I'll make you a profit. No matter what you decide, we'll do it right.
Sorry about that. Greg, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First of all, on this whole issue, I appreciate all the information that we've received, especially the most recent information that helped clarify some things. But the point that I want to make, and it's similar to the point I made last time, I like the idea of an administrator taking on some additional duties for central office and relieving some of the duties of the current principals, because it doesn't seem like it's getting easier. And I know that we have to look at the finances. I'm very much aware of that. But it seems to be like people are taking on more and more, and yet expecting to improve. And I think that's hard to do. So I do also struggle with this decision. But just like to me, we've made the decision to secure all our schools and invest the money. And that was for the safety of our children. I still feel that is number one in my thoughts. And I certainly would support the idea of an administrator and taking on some of the administrative duties. Thank you.
Diane?
I'm sorry if I missed it, but did Steve's question get answered about would a school counselor be covering a classroom when a teacher is out?
So I did, but I can restate that. I think there's a few different strategies that a counselor in this scenario might undertake. It might be that they are working to communicate with Mr. Delzer, the principal in this case, to discuss what's happening. They may be working with the student individually as they would in a counseling situation. Generally, when there's a behavioral issue, there's some underpinnings there that a counselor could certainly work to support. Or they may be, if this is a larger issue that's waiting for Mr. Delzer to arrive, they may be covering a classroom for the administrative intern. There's a couple of different solutions or different strategies that a counselor might work through. But again, as has been mentioned before, really a priority for that counselor needs to be working with students. That's what their job is. That's what we hired them to do. I just happen to think that we can do both. And again, that's just the efficiency of how I view this particular issue and how I view that strategy working. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Roger?
I just want to comment that, last meeting we had some good comments on, like Diane said, that, the taxpayers and so on of the city have, and with the failed referendums, we have some difficult decisions coming. And like she said, this might be one of those difficult situations. Then also, as far as only the 1 year, if we try it, a split administration, this would be the year, in my opinion, to do it, because we don't know what education is going to be doing in the fall, depending on if this COVID goes away, it could come back. This would be the time to try it. And then next year, like Steve said, assess it at that time. And if it's not working through this next year, then move on to hire a full-time. But this does give us an opportunity to check to see if it does work, and then show to the taxpayers we are trying to do something and we hear them.
Bob?
You're muted, Bob.
Hang on a second. Trying to get there. Oh, there we go. Try it again.
Can you hear me now?
You're good.
All right. I don't know what happened there. Okay. First of all, I'm pretty conservative, and that's not always popular. I know that. I made the motion initially, and I stand by it. But I want to make sure that people understand that just because anybody here feels that we can do a shared principle, that they don't care about kids. I think nothing could be further from the truth. And I think what we have to think about a little bit is caring about all kids, not just the kids that we have in school this year or next year, but the kids that we have in school a few years from now, whenever. It's hard right now. We're in very difficult times. And I'll give you a couple of examples. How many of you have driven around any rural area in the last few weeks and seen corn standing in the fields? Everybody. You don't have to drive very far. Drive out to the hospital, just west of Menards. You're going to see corn standing in the fields. That means there's a farmer there that is going to get one crop in 2 years. You multiply that throughout the eastern part of North Dakota, and you got a significant loss to the farm economy. How many of you saw the article in the Fargo Forum this weekend that Coal Creek Station, the large coal plant, is shutting down? That's going to cost a lot of jobs. It's going to cost the state's economy. It's going to be a tremendous loss. Remember back not too long ago, oil they couldn't give it away. The price was below zero. I'm not sure how that works. But that's what was being reported. I think we're in for some very difficult times. And if we truly care about kids and want the best education for our kids, we have to think about decisions that we make and how it's going to affect the future. And I don't want to be put in a position where a few years from now that we're struggling because we haven't done prudent things in the past. And just be aware of what's going on and what could happen in the future. And I don't mean to spread doom and gloom. I'm not that kind of a person. By nature, I'm a very optimistic person. And I don't know, I suppose you can be optimistic and conservative at the same time. I hope it works, but I feel like I am. But let's think about that and where we're going to be. If it doesn't work, if we have troubles, it's very easy to switch, to change. That's easy. If we get in a fiscal bind 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, then we have difficulties. And I don't want to be in a position again where this district has been in the past. Those of you that have been on the board for a while can remember every time a position opened up, do we fill it? That's hard. And then you wind up making very difficult decisions. Or even worse than that, Jamestown hasn't had to do this, but do we have to cut positions? How do we balance the budget? Attrition is the easiest way to go. And I made the motion last time. I stand by it. I still think it's best way to go. I appreciate the input we've had from parents and staff. I understand their position. I really do. I wish we could do more, but you can only do so much. And I hope before we vote, we give careful consideration to all parts of this issue. So thank you.
Steve, did you have something more to add?
Yeah, I think Bob kind of clarified it, but I guess we do. How long are we locked in if we put another principal in this building rather than a shared principal? What sort of a commitment are we making at that point?
So are you asking, just restate your questions just so I understand. Are you saying if we add a principal or continue the practice of having a full-time administrator in some capacity, whether they have central office responsibilities or other portfolio assignments, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess as far as if we do the shared principal thing, we obviously could change next year and hire another one. But if we put another principal in there and give them whatever responsibilities, I guess that's not the issue. But we have 5 principals again. How long are we committed to that based on the contracts that we give them?
So they're continuing contracts. So they would have the same continuing contract rights as any other contracted employee. So they would have the right to a continuing contract unless you non-renew them.
So that's a much more permanent situation than giving it a try for a year and seeing how it turns out.
So I don't want to be disingenuous about that, but it's harder, but it can still be an annual decision. I think we need to go into that eyes wide open about what that is. It could still be an annual decision. It's just a much harder one because now it's a hearing, revoking continuing contract, non-renewing, reduction in force. That's a harder decision to make, but that could still be made annually too. So I want to make sure that the board understands the distinction. So yes, it could still be an annual decision. I can clarify if that's needed.
Greg?
Yeah, I guess I just, Dr. Leck, if you could clarify the difference between the principal and having an administrator there that's supporting the other principals in the central office.
I'm not completely sure I understand your question, but they would, if they're contracted employees, they would have continuing contract rights if they're contracted. Did that answer your question or did I muddy the waters?
I think you answered it. Because like I said, I was looking at the idea of someone supporting the administration, the central office, and being located at the school.
Correct. So that would be a contracted position, a contracted administrator, just like a building principal. That portion, that other portion, if there was some allocation devoted to central office or other portfolio assignments, that would still be a contracted employee. It's no different than what we have with our building principals now. They share different portfolio responsibilities. They might have TAG, they might have Title I coordination, they might have district communications, different portfolio assignments like that. And so we currently have that and they're still contracted employees.
Jason?
Yeah, I don't want to be too blunt here, but I don't foresee us doing this position for a year and then changing the situation. I just don't see that happening. I feel that whatever we decide today will be what we go with. I just have a hard time believing we would really step back and say it's not working unless something really egregious happened. And one thing to point out, yes, it's not fun a few years down the road to let people go from their jobs, but I mean, within the next, I don't know how many years, there will be more attritions and we can reevaluate then. My whole thing right now is that the needs of our kids are just too great to make this kind of a change. And I still go back to really quickly, I am deeply, deeply concerned about the liability and the use of our counselor as in certain situations, not the go-to. I just really, really hesitate to take more services away from kids in any capacity. And I really see that happening here.
Mr. Leck, I think Jennifer is having some computer problems, so should I take over the meeting at this point?
Yes, just to lead discussion, I would, I think that would be appropriate if she is not able to get back on.
It looks like she's locked, and so is there any more discussion on this topic? Did everyone get their questions answered?
If there's no more discussion and we're ready to vote, I would request a roll call vote on this.
All right, Diane. Yes, Jason, and point taken, but Diane, I think you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask one more question about Greg's view of this. If we do hire another principal to take the place of Mrs. Clemens, do you have a vision, Dr. Leck, on how much that person would be supporting the central office? What percentage?
A good question. I think it really depends on the people that we hire. We're going to look at the person that's hired and try to maximize their skill set. So that could look different in a few different ways. But one thing I can say is we would assess all of those principals at the elementary level and look at those portfolio assignments. And so we'd have to reshuffle based on the people that, or the person that we're bringing on board. That person may have a particular skill set. So some of that is kind of hard to say it's this percent. I think some of that could be in flux too. In certain times, that could be a lot. We could really need some support. I think back to when we were working on our strategic plan, we really needed an additional set of hands and another mind, another perspective. And so in that kind of situation, we might really use that person as that director of elementary education. And that was important, or that would be important for that group, or at that time. And other times it might not be as much. And that's why I would think the position would be housed at Washington, but we might need to share that position that would, in that scenario, if the concern is the visibility and the shared position, that position would, to the degree possible, be housed at Washington, even if some of the time devoted is to central office. I know in the past when Dr. Saxberg was in that shared position, the position left Washington and came to central office for a period of time. I just wouldn't feel that would be necessary to the same degree in a virtual world. A lot of that stuff that we can operate with remotely, and that we can give tasks and responsibilities and work around that schedule in a way that's feasible. So I hope that answers your question in my roundabout way.
Yes, it did. Thank you. Yes.
Any other questions or clarifications? Greg?
Yeah, I was thinking, would it be possible to try to reach Jennifer on the phone before we would take this to a vote? Because I'm sure she would want to be a part of the vote.
She's in on, when she came back in, she got in on as an attendee. Dr. Leck, are you able to switch her over to that? So I don't know if she's on the phone, or I don't know how. I see your name is on the attendees.
I'm just bringing her in now. I didn't see her over there. And so I'm going to give...
I'm back.
I'll give authority back here to President Schmidt here.
Thank you. My Surface was plugged in, but unfortunately was not taking the charge and didn't notice until too late. However, I did catch in on the conversations as a panelist. Are there any other comments or discussions? Heidi?
Go ahead and take Roger first.
Heidi, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I think Roger had his hand up before me. If he can go ahead and go first if he'd like.
Oh, sorry, Roger.
Yep. I would just like to say, the decision of going into the future and making a decision, whether, like Dr. Leck said, we can make that decision in the future either way. But I mean, most of the board was involved in when we had the farm program. We had to riff there, and the amount of emotions that were involved there, and the amount of public I'm not going to say outcry or input that we had from that was a tough decision to make. And I would rather be making a decision now and then versus having a tougher one into the future.
Heidi?
I'm meaning toward keeping a principal in the building, but not, I think as far as equity, I think we need to look at the middle ground option. And I don't know if that's something we need to vote or just Dr. Leck can move move staff around as needed. And so I'm not sure if that, so maybe he can clarify for that. I also want to just make sure that even if we open this, if it goes one way, if we open this position, that we hire the right person too. If we feel like we aren't getting a good pool of candidates, then I'm kind of on the fence, so I'm comfortable with the plan going the other way. So,
anything else? All right. So the motion on the table, which has been seconded, is to go with Dr. Leck's recommendation of the shared position between Louis-L'Amour and Washington Elementary. Can I please have a roll call vote? And your answer in a yes is that you are saying yes, that you want the position to be shared. If you say no, you disagree with that.
Diane Hansen.
Oh, thanks. I would say no.
Roger Hout.
Yes.
Heidi Larson.
no.
Jason Rohr.
No.
Jennifer Schmidt.
No.
Robert Toso.
Yes.
Steve Beltkamp.
No.
Greg Allen.
No.
Melissa Gleason.
No.
Motion fails 6-3.
Thank you. Dr. Leck?
If I could just make a comment first, thank you for the direction. It's never easy to make these kinds of recommendations, and I appreciate the thoughtful nature. I've been very impressed and proud of you as a board as you have worked through this problem. Again, it's not easy. I get it. It wasn't easy for me either. Those aren't easy recommendations to make. And so I appreciate the thoughtful nature that you've taken to get to this point. And so my intention will be tomorrow to post a principal position for Washington Elementary, and we will reshuffle job responsibilities, or I should say portfolio responsibilities based on the individual that we hire, but we will start looking for that person tomorrow.
Thank you for that.
Madam President, I have a parliamentary inquiry or a clarification. Was the vote 6-3 or 7-2?
Sally?
7-2, right? Sally, you're muted.
7-2. My apologies. 7-2.
Thank you, Mr. Rohr. I do appreciate that for the record. Moving on in the agenda to new business, we have nothing under activities, so we'll move into building and grounds. Dr. Leck, would you please provide us commentary for the approved of the update summer facility projects?
So you have the attachment there that outlines what I'm proposing. Very, very minor changes to it. We've had some updated cost estimates, added a few projects, really very minor. It stays right within the next year's allocation. So we're really right in line with where we were. I'd be happy to answer specific questions if you have them, but essentially they're very, very similar projects, expansions of a handful of minor projects, but it gets us spending right about what we're bringing in terms of revenue.
Okay, I have a motion to approve the summer projects.
Updated yet?
So move.
Motion by Bob, second by Jason. Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to curriculum assessment and instruction. For us to review is the continued agreement with the Division of Juvenile Services to provide a model day treatment program for at-risk youth at Jamestown Middle School for the 2020-2021 school year in the amount of $44,750. Sally or Dr. Leck, do you have any commentary to add? Dr. Leck?
So this is a program, you're in the middle of a 3-year agreement. I think the middle, correct, Sally? The middle. We don't need approval. It is the, go ahead, Sally.
It'll be close.
It's a 2-year, sometimes they do a 2-year, sometimes they do a 3-year. This is a 2-year agreement. And so it was, Dr. Leck's recommendation, which is great, to bring forth the financial, but it was a commitment for last year, 1920 and 2021.
So we're just bringing it up for review, just so the board is aware. I think in multi-year agreements, it's good to either bring for approval when it's necessary, but review just so you're aware that expense is out there. But that's why that's on the agenda.
Thank you for that. Any questions from the board? Moving on to the letter B, can I have a motion to approve the school lunch prices for the 2020-2021 school year?
So moved, Roger.
Motion by Roger, second by Jason. Any discussion? I did have a quick question. Was this a slight increase I noticed because of the federal guidelines?
Right. So a few years ago, they do an equity adjustment or an equity calculation where we have to be within a certain range. And so sometimes the feds tell us at the federal level, they tell us you have to raise at least this amount. And that's to get it in line with what the reimbursement rates are. And so that's what happens. For us, our prices have been so low that we have to make an annual increase to get to that preferred level. So this is one of those situations. Regardless of that, though, I think our food service account is in a position where you need to raise even if they weren't asking us to, I think you have to do it anyway. But that's kind of where I'm at, just my perspective on it anyway.
Thank you. With no further discussion, please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the extended food service 2020 summer program through June 30th?
So moved.
Motion by Greg.
Second.
Second by Diane. Any discussion? Diane?
No.
Any other discussion? Oh, Dr. Leck?
Just asking, is there a need to clarify any more? I hope I was clear when I presented in my report. The idea would be that we would create a budget for this additional month of services that match the revenue we're anticipating to bring in. We wouldn't be looking to lose money. Now that would be a change in the last couple of months. We've been required to provide payment to our cooks at their normal wage, at their normal hours through the end of the school year. This would be a program that would run based on how many cooks we need to service the students, and that this would be a zero sum. That we aren't trying to make money, but we can't lose any more money either because we do have expenses to pay. And I just wanted to clarify that with people because I'm afraid, based on some of the questions that I had, that in the past, when we talked about the food service account needing additional support, that was related to this program, and it isn't. This program actually helps us. It helps us generate revenue, and the slide wasn't as bad as it could have been. And so this program has been helpful for us, but it doesn't cost us money. We want to make sure that it is strictly a service that we can provide. I think it's great. I think it's great flexibility. I think it really, really helps families in need right now. The feedback we've gotten from families that use it are very, very appreciative. And in just my opinion, I think we need to continue to provide this service as long as we have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you for that. Diane?
Yeah, that is the one part that confuses me, Dr. Leck. if we are required by the governor's guidelines to pay our employees, whether they work or not, through the pandemic, how is it helping us?
Thanks
How
for
is the program helping us?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the requirement is through the end of the school year. So we're still paying for our staff full time. And so it's helping us because we're getting reimbursement for the meals that we do serve. If we opted not to provide this more flexible service, we wouldn't be generating any revenue. Now we would have a little bit less cost because we wouldn't have the need for food. But the major expense are our personnel. So we would still have that. We're actually generating a decent amount of revenue for those 750. It's just not enough to keep us afloat. And the reality is when you see that recommendation for using CARES dollars for food service, it's probably going to be in the $110,000 range. You know, we've lost a lot of revenue, and that's just based on that executive order that we need to pay people that are contracted or are hourly people through the end of the school year. So that's where that comes from. Like I said, that's why it's helped us instead of hurt us, and I think it helps kids.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you with that. We will go ahead and move on in the agenda to the general fund balance. Are there any questions, or Sally, any information you'd like to address with the general fund balance? Dr. Leck?
Did you vote on that?
No.
Was there a
Oh, I apologize. I didn't see it was an action item. Go ahead. I do know we have the motion though. So if everybody could unmute their mics. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to letter D, the general fund balance. Are there any questions? Okay, with that, then we'll move to letter E. Can I have a motion to approve the monthly financials?
So moved.
Motion by Roger.
Second by Steve.
Second by Steve. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to number 4, personnel. Can I have a motion to approve the hire of Brittany Chandler as the special education strategist at high school at salary of $44,317 for the 2020-2021 school year upon completion of a background check?
So moved.
Motion by Greg, second by Roger. Any discussion? Dr. Leck?
Just very quickly wanted to reiterate the point I made before. Mrs. Chandler is in the process of getting her master's degree conferred. So that amount will go up when she turns in that paperwork. I just wanted the board is aware. You don't have to do anything different. It's just making you aware.
Thank you. Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to letter B, can I have a motion to approve to hire Sarah Robinson, a special education teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, at a salary of $45,889.50 for the 2020-2021 school year upon completion of a background check?
Melissa Gleason, so moved.
Jason Rohr, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to letter C. Would you also like me to include number 1 on a subsequent number C, subsequent? I'm going to go ahead and include those together. Dr. Leck?
I would recommend that you act on them separately.
Okay, we can do so.
Yeah.
A motion, can I have a motion to approve the hire of Joseph Oster as food service director for the district, salary of $70,000 for the 2020-2021 school year upon completion of a background check?
Jason Rohr moves to approve to hire Joe Oster as food service director for the district.
And then seconded by Heidi. Any discussion? Please unmute your marks. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve to hire Joseph Oster as Food Service Director for District for Summer Food Program and Training at a salary of $4,000 for the 2019-2020 school year upon completion of the background check?
So moved.
Motion by Greg,
Second.
second by Melissa. Any discussion?
I just have a question on that. That was for 12 days to run concurrent with Shelley still, right?
Correct.
How did we come up with that rate per day? Because I come up with like $333.
Sally?
It would be 97, the calculation would be 3 cents difference. So I just rounded it up to $4,000. The
Is
per
that
day
accept-
amount, his salary, the $70,000 salary per the 210 days that he's contracted for,
Okay.
take that time for 10 days. And
So
yes, it was.
So
Go ahead.
that is his daily rate on his normal contract.
Yes,
It's
Okay.
prorated. Yep. It's a prorated for 12 days.
yes.
Thank you.
And Shelley would be there for the full week and then he would close out the summer, so we would have Shelley, which is great.
So we picked 12 days based on when Shelley's availability was and what she recommended she needed to help with year end. And we wanted to make sure that when Mr. Oster started, that he could hit the ground running on July 1st. And there's a lot at play here. We feel really, really fortunate to have somebody with, even though he doesn't have school food service experience, he has a lot of food service experience. Plus, he has the Department of Public Instruction Child Nutrition experience. Just the paperwork and the knowledge of the responsibilities and the regulations can't be understated in how important that is to somebody starting and starting smoothly.
Steve?
Our food service prices aren't going to go the same way as Medora's now, are they?
Hope not. No.
Maybe if we do a pitchfork fondue in the schoolyard. Oh. Sally?
I just wanted to comment for those that have been on the board for a while, if you remember Deb Eglund. She was our food service director. Joe worked with her at the Department of Public Instruction. And so,
Okay.
yes.
Keeping it in the district.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Any other questions or discussion?
So is he a native of Jamestown or what's his?
No, he's living in Steele right now, but no, he's not a native.
All right.
Good find.
Any other 411s? No. I'm kidding. Any other discussion? All right. Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on. Oh, Heidi, sorry.
I just have one comment about all these hires. These are, and congratulate Dr. Leck and the staff that were involved in these hires. We have some difficult positions to fill, special ed and our food service, and job well done. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that, Heidi. Moving on to letter D, summer school contracts. Can I have a motion to approve the summer school and extended school year contracts for 2020?
So moved. This is Roger.
Steve Veldkamp, second.
Motion by Rogers, second by Steve. Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to policy and procedures. Can I have a motion to approve the second reading of the staff student relations non-fraternization policy, DEBD policy?
This is Greg. So moved.
I'm going to speak up for Amy. We should have it on record that, the board member should be stating the motion,
Can I have a second with the motion stated, please?
This is Roger. I'll second.
Can you please state the motion, Roger?
I second the motion for the approval of the second reading of the staff-student relationship non-fraternization policy, DEBD policy.
Any discussion? Please unmute your mics. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the second reading of the extracurricular transportation IEAF policy?
Jason Rohr moves to approve the second reading of extracurricular transportation IEAF policy.
I'll second Roger.
Any discussion? Heidi?
My link to I noticed my link doesn't work to that one. Last meeting I talked about removing the student driving part. Did we have a chance to do that? My link isn't working, so I can't pull it up.
Oh, Dr. Leck, you're muted.
I thought we changed that. I do know what the intention is. And so we'll make sure that I know that that's what the board is discussing, the limitation of the transportation policy. So maybe to be safe here and to make sure that everybody sees it, we'll just bring it back for review and to make sure that it is what you're intending. And so I'll just ask Amy to bring it back for review one more time, but I get that's the intention.
So do we need a motion to table this? Or can we just bring it to the next meeting? Okay. So we'll bring it to the next meeting then. Okay. Do I need to do anything further? No? Okay. Sorry, my dog's inside now. Can I have a motion to approve the elementary school handbook for the 2020-2021 school year? Motion by Bob.
This is Roger. I'll second the approval of the elementary school handbook for the 2020-2021 school year.
Any discussion? Heidi?
And I appreciate the work on the highlights of the changes and stuff. It makes it a lot easier to review the changes compared to the previous ones.
Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to letter B for our information is the graduation ceremony planning. And I have to say I was thoroughly looking over this and very pleased of all the different pieces that came into play and to make sure that this could be done as safely as possible once the Department of Public Instruction gave us the clearance to go ahead and do that. I have had the privilege of also reviewing other school graduations per my day job, and this is probably the most comprehensive one that I've seen. And so I do applaud Mr. Gaylor and Dr. Leck for taking the time to do that. Are there any questions or comments on the graduation ceremony? Well, congratulations to our graduates, and we look forward to virtually watching your ceremony online. Dr. Leck?
But just a comment, to thank our class of 2020 graduates. I'm a dad of a graduate, and what a tough situation for them. This has been such a challenge for families and such a challenge for our graduates. None of this is easy. We take for granted a lot what we have sometimes, and our ability to all support our children as they graduate, or our loved ones, or whoever they are. And when we have limits, and I can tell you from personal experience, my own son and struggling with, well, which four? Which four get to come? And we see in Fargo recently where they say, oh, nobody can come, just graduates. And what a challenge this is. And it's been such a hard thing to work through, and just a great deal of appreciation for our families. And it isn't all roses. Some people look and say, well, you shouldn't do it. Or some people look and say, I wish I could have more. And we get it. It's not hard to be compassionate with people when they have these challenges. I get it. I think we have a good plan. I think we have a reasonable plan. I think it's pretty comprehensive in terms of trying to mitigate risk as much as we can and still have a ceremony. Nothing's perfect. and this certainly isn't. But a lot of work and thought went into these guidelines. I want to give a lot of credit to the high school administration. We get to talk, and we, in the office, at central office, we get to talk a lot. And we say, well, we should do this, and we should do that. What about this? What about that? They have to go and do it. It's easy to talk. It's a lot harder to do. And they have to go out and make all of this work. And they've worked many, many hours. Mr. Conway, Mr. Gaylor, Mr. Heinert have worked many, many hours to make sure that this is a good experience. And I think it's the best we're going to be able to provide given the circumstances. But I think just a lot of commendation to all of the people that are involved, that were involved in drafting the plan, but also making it happen. And so I look forward to the process. Graduation is probably my favorite day of the year. And first day of school, or the first in-service day is right up there too. But the graduation is such a fun event because our families come and support, and they see the end product. It's that culminating capstone experience. And so not everybody's going to get to see it in the same way, but we have at least take some solace in the fact that we're going to provide it for our students, and either virtually or live for our families too. But a lot of effort goes into those kinds of plans, and a lot of planning and work and additional time. And like I said, I think our high school administration and the staff involved, I don't want to miss out the counselors too, but everybody's just done a fantastic job.
And if I could go from the 12th grade, Heather, you probably saw her sneak out. She's starting her end of the year Zoom with all of her little kindergartners. So yeah, it sounds like a little beehive out there.
Yes, these virtual things. All right, very good. Well, moving on, is there any items for future agendas? Heidi?
Just maybe I missed it somewhere, but wondering, I sat on the call with Superintendent Baszler, and there was also some availability for access to the grounds, I think is what I understood. Outside facilities. Just wondering, just maybe at the next meeting, some updates on the planning toward that.
Sure, I did reference some of that in my report, but with that guidance, it is, it can't be understated the importance of summer programming to kids. And it just is going to look different. If you have a camp, the rules are going to look different. It's not going to be a traditional camp, regardless of if it's a co-curricular or an athletic or extracurricular activity. It's going to look different. And so I can kind of talk you through the process that we're going to use. It's going to have to go from proposal from a coach and advisor to the administrator that's in charge of that building. And then we're going to get feedback from our county health. Are there any recommendations that we should be looking at or could be looking at? And then we have to give approval based on that. It's in the past, the real concern we had is the gym busy? You have to do it a different week because somebody's, we're waxing the floors or something. And now it's going to be a much more detailed example of what their plans are, because you're not going to be able to do everything. You have to limit contact and things like that. But I can certainly talk through that.
Heidi, did you have something further?
And just even access for like our families, to neighborhood families, to like the playground equipment and those kinds of things on the outside school grounds, because those are restricted.
Yeah, I'll put that in my report if that's okay.
That'd be great.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Just one more quick question, and you don't need to go into a lot of detail, Dr. Leck, but is there any indication or work at the state level on a potential virtual fall semester starting? I mean, are we starting to think about that?
That's $1 million question. We hope not. I think you have to plan for the inevitability, but I think as the phases progress throughout the summer, it's going to give us a little bit more. But we have to be thinking about what a soft opening would look like. And that's one of the reasons, and I think Dr. Larson was the one who mentioned it, or maybe it was Mrs. Schmidt, I can't remember, but just the importance of summer programming to understanding how we open again. we're going to learn a lot of lessons from summer programming, and I don't think we want to limit how valuable that experience is going to be for us, but we just don't know yet. I'll keep you in the loop.
Bob?
Along the same lines with opening school in the fall, of course, comes extracurricular activities. They start the 1st of August with some of them. So if you hear anything along those lines, I'd appreciate getting the word out. And we'll get it in the paper too, but just whatever you know. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Anything else for items for future agendas? All right. So we have meetings to be scheduled. We have our high school graduation on this Sunday, May 24th. And additionally, on Wednesday, there is another meeting for school board members to join Superintendent Kirsten Basler virtually. She has sent out that meeting so there will be a recognized special meeting on Wednesday. Our next regular school board meeting is on Monday, June 1st at 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room, but also via virtual. So because we're still wanting to ensure we have the less than 50% capacity and that we're still able to social distance, we will primarily use the virtual platform again for the June 1st meeting. However, because the school grounds will have a soft opening, if you will, we can look to doing a blended type of board meeting. So do look for the link again to join via Zoom. We also have the GED graduation on Tuesday, July 14th. Please remember to right-click on the monthly superintendent evaluation and finish and do the sections that are selected. And I also see that the adjournment to rate the meeting is kind of grouped together in the agenda. So there are 2 separate links there. This was a really good meeting, everyone. Lots of great opinions. We did, and I would really appreciate you to take time and to make that noted of what worked and what didn't work, and especially in this virtual environment as we learn. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Thank you.